in the infantry. I was a team leader and squad leader and went on search and destroy operations and ambush patrols. And after the first 2 months of building our base camp, I think it was in the third month that we got our first real taste of combat. And we had to relieve the 25th Infantry Division, which was operating in the Hobo Woods, and they had a big conflict with the North Vietnamese and suffered major casualties, and it was our job to replace them. And as I saw them coming out of the woods and looking at their faces and seeing the fear in their eyes, I guess I knew what I was in for. And right then and there I knew that if I was to survive physically and mentally, and I didn't know what God had in store for me physically for the remainder of that year, but I knew if I was going to survive mentally, I had to turn my life over to God completely. He had to be in control of everything. And maybe just some situations to bear that out. It was the first one. We were operating in a French, what was a French rubber plantation. As you know, if you know your history, the French were over in Vietnam in the 50s prior to our getting over there in the early 60s. We were operating in this rubber plantation, and there was an airstrip there that they had for small planes, and sometime prior to our getting over there, the Vietnamese mined that airstrip. And so we had a mine team and then plus some other volunteers, and I happened to be one of those that got volunteered for that job to clear this mine strip, or this airstrip rather. And we had detected a lot of mines, and then as we were going along, I stepped on something and I wasn't sure what it was, and when I pulled my foot off it, I realized it was a mine, but it happened to be a dud. So thank goodness for that. Another situation, when I was, like I said, I was a squad leader. We went on a squad-sized ambush patrol, 15 guys. We got to our site. I told the guys to just wait here, and then I went on ahead with my radio operator to look where I was going to position my men and set up the killing zone. And as we were walking along this trail, this Viet Cong opened fire on us, and well, if you want to see somebody run fast, or you want to see somebody with the fear, with fear inside of them run fast, well, that was me. I did the fastest run, the fastest low parole I think anybody ever witnessed. Or another time on an ambush patrol, this was 2 squads, approximately 30 guys. Got all the guys in position and got a call from the company commander saying that 350 or approximately 350 Viet Cong were spotted within 500 to 600 meters of our position. And I was to alert all our men not to shoot or do anything foolish and just sit there and hopefully they'd pass by on one side or the other. So I crawled around to all the positions and told them of this. Good news. And what was it, probably 15, 20 minutes later, here they came and walking along the jungle, making a lot of noise, talking, but fortunately they stayed about 75 yards away from us and didn't, overrun our position. You can about imagine there were a lot of beating hearts, thumping pretty good. Or another time when I saw the fear in others is when I had just a couple of months left before I went back to the States. And that afternoon they sent 3 new guys over to my squad. And that evening before I put them in position, I had an opportunity to talk to them. And they told me they were gangsters from Chicago. And they had 1 or 2 choices. One, they could either join the military or go to prison. And obviously they chose the military. But talking to them, there basically wasn't a crime they had not committed on the streets of Chicago. And being a little apprehensive that evening, I set them next to my position. And it seemed like every 15, 20 minutes they were, Sergeant, we hear something. Should we shoot? And obviously I'd go over there and there was nothing going on out there. If it had been up to them, they would have shot off all their ammunition in the first hour. to coin a phrase, they were scared to death. One other interesting thing about these three guys, as was the case on Sunday mornings, chaplain would usually fly out to the field, and we'd have a church service out there. And then on this particular morning, there was probably 15 to 20 guys sitting on a rice paddy berm. And as the chaplain was handing out, it was probably like a bulletin with a couple hymns on one side, and I think it was the order of church service on the other. Guess who came to our church service? Here came these three gangsters. And I couldn't help but think, what do they want? What would they be doing here? I guess I'll leave you answer that. One situation. A good friend of mine, specialist fourth class, Lewis, he was from South Dakota, a good Christian guy. And we were on a search and destroy operation and walking along. He was walking on a rice paddy berm, and he tripped a booby trap, and a lot of shrapnel was expelled into his lower extremities. And he was obviously in a lot of pain. We called for medevac back to our base camp, and as I was sitting there on the rice paddy berm kind of holding him up because he was in a lot of pain going into shock, and as the helicopter was approaching to air evac him back to the base camp, he said to me, "Sarge, I'm not going to die, am I?" I said, well, and this was basically a totally reactionary response. I said, "No, you'll be all right." The next day when the company clerk came out with our sea rations, water, mail, other supplies we needed, I made a point to look up the company clerk and ask him how Lewis was doing. And he said, "Well, he died last night." And then I thought of what I said to him, "You'll be all right." And yeah, he is all right because he's in a far better place where there is no more war. I'd like to close with reading Matthew 14, some verses out of there. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came to them walking on the water. When the disciples saw him, they screamed in terror, thinking it was a ghost. But Jesus spoke to them at once. "It's all right," he said. "I am here. Don't be afraid." Then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you by walking on water." "All right, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over to the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. But when he looked around at the high waves, he was terrified and began to sink. "Save me, Lord," he shouted. Instantly, Jesus reached out his hand and grabbed him. "You don't have much faith," Jesus said. "Why did you doubt me?" And when they climbed back in the boat, the wind stopped. I guess in my life, when I've stepped out in faith, I've experienced God's love, His grace, and His protection. And that has been more than sufficient for me. However, there are far too many times when I take my eyes off Jesus, and obviously the waves of life seem so big, and I begin to sink, just like Peter. So it's important that I keep my focus on Jesus.